Hi, today we're going to be taking a look at creating a CatRig for a character inside of 3ds Max. This is going to be a brief overview of what essentially was a 3-hour class, getting just down to the nuts and bolts without taking a look at many of the reasoning behind why, and we also won't be looking at any of the other rigs. And so this is kind of just an abridged version so that you can get the rig done on your own character. Now, what I've got here in Max is a character that I had done, Batgirl. There's some shader issue going on here with her cape. I've got a two-sided material on her cape, and you can see the transparency doesn't work so well with that. And she is a fully textured version of the character, so she's all kind of ready to go. This is the low poly version of the character here. I do have several meshes in here, so she's not all completely attached together. I might go and rename some of these things here. So I've got mesh Batgirl, mesh eyes, mesh hair, mesh utility belt. So this one, I should probably rename this one as well. I'll just rename it mesh cape. So each of my meshes now bears a unified kind of naming convention. This again just makes it easier to identify what I'm looking at. So using the prefix of mesh, I'm able to tell which each of these things are. Now, this is not a big deal when you export this into a game engine, because the FBX that I would export would actually contain all of these things, and the FBX name then would become the name of the character. So I'm not worried about the mesh names here. They're not going to be troublesome in any way. I'm going to do some preparation before I start creating the rig, and that preparation is going to include a few things to make my life a little bit easier. One of the first things I want to do is take a look at the layering in 3ds Max. So up here in the layer button, you can see that I have a layer called mesh, and inside that are all my meshes. This means that if I hide that layer, the mesh goes away. This allows me to independently work on both the rig, the controllers, and the mesh. And it allows me to freeze the entirety of the mesh as well. Now you see when you do that, the cape turns blue. This means that its properties, if I go down to its object properties here, it's got show frozen gray turned on. And so now, freezing the entire layer, there should be no change, which is good. I'm going to make sure that all of my meshes here have the same color. This is just me being a little finicky. And what I want to do, just because the textures that I've got on her here, they're going to get in the way while I'm doing what I'm doing. And so what I'd like to do is just turn those off. So I'm going to go to the display properties and just switch this over to the object colors. That way when we look at it, we're just looking at an untextured version of the mesh. This way I'm not going to get distracted by any of my textures or what have you. The next thing that I want to do is ensure that the rig I create is in its own layer, and that I don't have to go and select all the bones later and move them over. So I'm going to start off by making a new layer. So I'm going to make sure I have nothing selected in my scene, and I'll go and create a new layer. I'll name this layer Rig. Now the little sheets of paper here are blue, indicating that anything I create will be created inside this new layer. Usually when I'm working with layers, I'll try and ensure that the default layer is the creation layer, so that anything that I make in that layer will appear there. But since it's going to be the rig that I'm going to be creating, I'll turn on this layer here and I'll go and create them in there. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the type of rig I'm going to be creating is called a CatRig. Now, there are several different types of rigs that you can create in 3ds Max, and several of these rigs can be combined as well, so you don't strictly need to use one or the other. The CatRig is the newest of the bunch, and is a little bit of an automated system. Now, we're not going to use this to create the rig that we would use in game, though it can be used to do so, but most animators you'll find work in Maya. And so the idea is that we're going to create a rig here just to ensure that our topology works, that we've got edge loops where we need them, and we're getting deformation where we need them, and the right kind of deformation. And I may even go and alter the pose of this character so that she's not in the modeler-friendly A pose, but into the rigger and animator-friendly T pose. And so that's kind of what we're going to start with. Now, first and foremost, I'm going to go to the Creation panel in the Command panel. And over here, we're going to go to the Helpers. And I'm going to use the drop-down here to alter the selection type from Standard to Cat Objects. Now, when I do this, I'm left with three options here: Cat Muscle, Muscle Strand, and Cat Parent. So the one that we're interested in is the Cat Parent. Now, if I turn my grid on, you'll notice that my character is standing at the origin. She is completely in line with the center line. So if we go and zoom in here, you can see that that center line actually cuts her right down the middle. This should continue all the way up through her face as well. And you can see her head is right down that symmetry line as well, which is good. That means she's going to work out quite nicely. And I'm going to create a Cat Parent, and I'm just going to drag this out from the center to about that size. Now, one of the downsides here of having the materials turned off is that the cat objects themselves are also going to be made in the same ugly gray color. And so I may go and alter this so that I can see the colors in these, although again, that's just going to be kind of personal preference. With the parent in place, I'm going to go to the modifier panel, and now we get some of the options here for the cat setup. So the first thing that I want to do is change the unit ratio to 1. I tried to eyeball this as close as I could to get it to 1. I was off a little bit, so no big deal. We'll move that over. The next thing that I want to do is using the Move panel. I'm going to go into my X and Y, and I'm just going to make sure that they are both set to 0 as well. This makes sure that the root for the character, which is essentially what we've gone and created here, that this too is situated at the origin, lining up with where the character is. Okay, let's do something about these colors now and see if we can't make this a little bit more cheerful. So I'm going to go back into my display properties, and I'll switch back to the material color. Now you notice that that doesn't help this guy, so that's good. That means that what's going on here is actually an artifact of the fact that we're using this this color selector here. So that's good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go switch this over, and in the end, it doesn't really matter what colors you use. Again, they're kind of insignificant, but I do find it a little bit easier on the eyes if we're not just working in this drab gray color. So there's that. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to make sure that my mesh here can't be selected. And I want to make her transparent as well, just so I can see through the mesh to where the joints are. So to do that, I'm going to go hit Alt-X to enter X-ray mode. I'm going to make sure I've got all of her selected when I do this. There we go. That includes her eyes, and there, now she's all completely transparent. And then in the layer tools, we'll go and freeze the mesh layer. So now I can't select and accidentally move my mesh, which is going to be important. Another thing too, you probably want to double check before doing this, before getting too far into this, is that your mesh is actually really ready to go. So case in point, I'm working on a female character here, and underneath my unit setup, I'm working in generic units, and my generic units are set up so that one unit is 1 centimeter. Under that scaling, if we go and create a box here at the origin, and I bring it to the top of her head, somewhere thereabouts, we can see that the height is 166. And if we go and convert that over, I'm just doing this over here, you can see that she's 5'4". And interesting spelling. There we go. So she's 5'4" and a bit, which, you know, that's a decent height for Batgirl. Okay, so she's to scale, which is good. And then all I'm going to do is just select all of the mesh layers here, and I'm going to reset her X form. Now this ensures that the scaling of each of these meshes by default is set to 100%. This just ensures that there's no errors along the way, no little mix-ups and things popping, larger or smaller or whatnot along the way. So we'll go back and freeze this layer. And I'll go and select my cat root again. And I'll go into the modifier panel, and we got some properties that we can go play with. So by default, it's going to name the entire rig this name here, CatRig, and which is fine. But I'm going to use a different name. I'm going to call it Batgirl Rig. Now, what this name is going to do is every additional bone that I create in this rig, every new child created from this parent root, is going to inherit that name all the way through. And so the idea is that this should start to kind of name our bones the right way. We also have the ability to view different track layers, and then the bone length axis. So this is kind of like the look at axis for a bone. So if you think up here of the forearm and the arm, the bone that runs from shoulder to elbow, that look at length where it's looking at the next bone is the length axis. And the default here is X. Again, this is something that animators have a lot of preference in, but since we're not going to be animating with this rig, only setting the character up to be animated, I'm just going to leave that alone. I'm going to not bother playing around with that. Below that, we have a list of preloaded cat rigs that we can choose from, that we can go and click on. Again, I'm not going to bother with any of that. We're going to make everything from scratch. So the next setting below that is going to be to open a preset rig, save a preset rig, add rigging, and create a pelvis. So I'm going to create a pelvis. Now in doing so, with our cat units ratio set up to 1, you can see that the pelvis does actually go pretty close to where my character's pelvis is. This will happen mostly all the way through. This character is a little on the stylized side, and so there are things like the shoulder joints won't end up in exactly the right place, but these are all really easy to move. Now, one of the things we want to be very attentive of here is when selecting one of these joints and moving it around, the display object that you see, in this case, the box that is surrounding the bone here, that is the visual indication of the bone. This, for the rigging process, is pretty useless. It's of no concern whatsoever. What is of the highest importance is the pivot point. Now, the pivot point indicates to us the actual XYZ position of the bone. So that place in 3D space where that pivot exists, that's where these bones exist and where the rotation will come from. So if I were to be in rotation here, you can see the rotating gizmo is exactly where that thing is, and as I rotate, it rotates around that pivot. And so that's the point we really need to pay attention to. Now we are going to go and modify the shape and look of these boxes a little bit afterwards, but for the most part, we don't really need to worry about them too much. The other thing that I want to do, and this is just going to help me out a little bit here, is ensure that the move is set to local, and the rotate is also set to local. Now, what this is going to allow us to do is have an easier time placing these bones. And if you'll remember, when we were looking at the cat parent object, our bone length axis was set to X. That means if I go and select this guy, where he's looking up at the next bone is X. And so they all should kind of share that property. So the first thing I'm going to do with this new bone, I'm going to ensure that it's got a proper name. So here the name of the bone, it was given the name Hub01, which I don't like, so I'll rename it Pelvis. And now the name of this object, if I select it, should be Batgirl Rig Pelvis, which is correct. And I'm going to go move it, just using the move tool here, into a place that's a little bit more indicative of where a pelvis should go. And so I want to pay attention again to where the pivot point is. I want to make sure that where that pivot goes is going to line up with where I want her pelvis to move. And so the idea with where the pelvis moves is this bone, I'm going to move it up just a little bit here. I essentially want this to be a little bit at the upper end of the pelvis. So if you kind of imagine there, there's this curvature here is the seam between her legs. That's the bottom of her torso. And you would picture that being a circle. That would give us essentially where the pelvis goes, with the upper arc. And again, you'll see this a little bit better from her pelvis here. In the front view, this little bulge right here is meant to be her iliac crest. That's about where her pelvis is going to end. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to put this bone kind of at about that range. The reason being that when this bone rotates, like so, this is going to rotate everything from this point down. And so the geometry for this, I'm actually going to move it down quite a bit so that it's all below the pivot point here. But that's essentially where I want that to go. And again, I'll get it a little bit centered in the mesh here. If anything, I'm going to keep it a little on the back end here, a little bit closer to where the spine would actually be. So again, I'm kind of paying attention to where the geometry is and where the shape of the mesh is. So somewhere about there is going to work. In the front view, this bone should be centered in the XYZ. Now, if you do go to use the type and transform by right-clicking on the Move tool, you do have to make sure that you're in view to see these values correct. When you're in local, they're always going to read as 0. And so you do need to bounce that back and forth if you're going to be altering that. Cool. Now, with that selected, I'm going to go over to the properties here, and again, I'm still in the modifier panel, and I can go down and you'll notice that we have some properties that we can play with. There is the length, width, and height, and I'm not going to edit any of those because we are going to use a custom mesh later on. So we'll just leave that for now. Below that we have add leg, add spine, add bone, add arm, add tail, add rigging. Now what we're actually interested in here is a leg, so I'm going to click that. And it's going to go and generate a leg for us. Now, the way these legs are generated, they're always going to come out of the side of the pelvis. So the width of the pelvis bone here, had I gone and played with that a little bit, that would have altered where that leg came from. And if we go and look at it, it's gone and arced straight down towards the ground. The foot is on the ground. We go look at this in the side view, and you can see that it's kind of got a bend to it here. To compensate for the length of the distance here from the pelvis to the ground. You can see none of this really lines up. And most importantly, down on the ground here, it's gone and created this little spline in the shape of a box. This is the IK handle that we can use to actually go and move that leg around. So this is the first thing I actually want to get correct. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and place this a little bit more in line with where her foot is. So I'd like the pivot point, and again, the pivot's what's of importance here. I'd like the pivot point for this to kind of be in the center of her foot, something a little bit like that, which is going to get this correct. And now I can go play with the length and the width of these. Now I do want the width here to be a little bit smaller. I don't want this to interfere with the one that's going to be created for the other foot. And I'll increase the length a little bit so that it is larger than her foot, so I have no problem selecting it. Currently, the display type is set to platform, and you can also go switch this to a cross, but I find the platforms are going to be a little bit easier to select, and then it's the spline kind of on a footprint type thing. So with that done, if I go to my front view, we should see that leg kind of lurching down. It's mostly in the right place now. I do want to go and set the hip bone up in a much better position. And so to do this, I want to pay attention to where that hip should pivot from. And so in doing this, I want to really look at where, almost picturing this to be an action figure. If I go and look at the circle here of the joint between her leg and her body, and I were to picture this being an enclosed circle, which is what one of those joints would look like, I'm going to want to place this pivot in about the center of that circle. And then in the front view, I'm going to lean it in a little bit as well. I'm kind of also looking for where the femur, would actually get plugged into her pelvis. And so I'm going to do something about there. I'm just kind of looking at this from different angles, making sure that it looks about right to me. And that one looks about correct. Next, we'll grab the knee joint, and this one's a little bit easier to figure out. I'm going to go and place this about here. The knee joint, I'm going to have it a little bit forward of the leg, so that the knee bends from the front a little bit better. Next, I'll grab the foot, and I'll go and position this as well. And I'm going to place this one kind of in the right place where her ankle would be. So you can see her boot here. She's in a heel or wedge kind of shoe. And so if you look at where the heel would be and where the ball of the foot would be, you know, I need to place this kind of accordingly here so that it does bend where her ankle would be. And then using rotate, I can go and position this a little bit better. So again, there are two things that I'm trying to correct. The first is the ankle, and the second one is going to be the very end down here, which is going to line up with where the next joint is going to go. And so I need to get this about correct. That's a little too much. That's not bad there. Again, I'm going to go grab that knee joint and reposition it, moving the foot has altered where the leg is here. So that's not too bad. Again, I'm going to double check that in the front these line up as well, which is not too bad. And that one also not too bad. And again, it lines up with her foot quite nicely. I'm going to go back into my side view here, and I've got her foot selected, and I'm just going to go and create a new bone. So again, I'm in the modifier panel. I have the foot bone selected, and down here I'm going to hit add bone. And now the add bone, the joint or the bone that gets added actually appears at the same pivot point. So what I want to do is go and select that bone, and I'm actually going to go and place it down here and rotate it into position. So this bone is going to be the ball of her foot, which is going to allow us to move the toes independently of the rest of the foot. Now, depending on the footwear you have, you know, some characters don't really need this this bone. But in the case of Batgirl here, I do want her toes to be able to bend. So I'm just going to go place this in about the right place. This bone should be parented to the foot bone. So you see when I move one, the other one does move. And if I grab the platform here at the bottom and I move that, we are getting a similarly linked hierarchy here, so that's going to be kind of good. I am going to go and adjust the length of this, and again, I'm going to go and alter the shape of these bones later, but we'll leave that like that for now. The next thing that I want to do is build in some twisting in these bones. So if you were to think of the foot here kind of pivoting around and rotating, you know, if she were to point her feet outwards or try and point her feet inwards or what have you, the femur, I don't want it to actually bend out from the socket here. So with the femur selected or the thigh bone selected, in its properties, there's the bone name here, and right now it's called left leg 1. And so I'm going to go add a different name here, and this will be left leg thigh, like so. If I deselect and reselect it, you'll see that now it's called Batgirl Rig left leg thigh. Again, giving us a very easy way of selecting these bones. The left leg prefix here will also help keep all the leg bones together. It gives us the ability of choosing how many bones we want, whether or not we want a collarbone or an ankle. In this case, we want an ankle. This is not a quadruped, so I'm not going to add a collar to this. And then I'm going to go and there's no segment name here, but if we go down and look, there's a number of segments. And I'm going to give the thigh 3 segments. Now what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that when the leg bends, we get a tapering of rotation in these bones. So essentially, as the shin bends here, you can actually see that taper happening. So we get a lot of rotation in the knee, a little bit less in the mid thigh, and then next to nothing in the upper thigh, making it so that she won't break her pelvis here as we start to animate her. So there's those 3 bones. Now if we go look at the naming convention of those, left leg thigh 3, left leg thigh 2, and left leg thigh 1. Down here, this is called left leg 2, so I'm going to give this bone a name, which is going to be calf. We can add some segments in here as well. I'll give it 3 segments. And normally your knee and your foot are not capable of being pointed in different directions, but on the off chance that we do get something that just needs a little bit of a tweak, it is nice to have these bones there. Now, in the end, you can still do a lot with the skinning once you get to that, but I'll go and do these the way they are. And so we get calf 1, calf 2, calf 3. This one is called ankle, and then this one, the last one we created, if I can go select it here, there it is called ankle bone 01. So again, it was created from the ankle bone, so it inherited that name, just gave it a new name. And so we'll go rename it. This is going to be, in fact, let's grab all of the prefix here from this. And I'll start by using the prefix. And then I'll go name the actual bone ball. So if we go select it now, it should combine those things for us. Batgirl rig, and it did not. It actually removed all that. So left leg ball. There we go. Excellent. So that appears to be one leg done. And I'm going to go and use the selection tool here and grab the platform, and I'm just going to ensure that it does move in a realistic way. You can see that there's a little bit of a funny bend in her knee. Now this is because I don't quite have the knee as straight as it should be. And so to fix that, I'm going to kind of just get that out here as much as I can. And I'll grab the platform here and just double check that her knee is going the right way. And you can see again, it's not. And so this is one of the reasons that animators actually like to have the arms completely parallel to the ground, is to avoid any kind of breaking like this. Now, I can use the IK handle that's in here to try and position this exactly the right way, and you can see that it just needs to have the pivot point exactly on that IK handle, which is easier said than done. With something a little bit like that might work a little bit better. I'll just grab this, and yeah, that's working a little bit better. Okay. The next thing that I want to do, I'm going to choose colors here for my rig. So anything, I've got this kind of teal color for the hip and the main root, and this is the left side. And so everything that's essentially down the left side, I'll make one color, and everything that's down the right side, I'll make another color. So I'm going to go with blue for the left, and I'll do green for the right. I may have that backwards, but whatever. This is an easy thing to change. So we'll go left leg blue, and I'll make all the joints that I'm going to make on the left side blue. Now what this does is when you're animating and you're looking at this from the side, it can be really hard to tell which joints are from which side of the body. But if you got them color-coded, in this case left side blue, easy to remember. If it's blue, I've got the one that's closest to us, and if it's green, it's the one that's further from us. With that leg done, I'm going to go and select her pelvis again, and I'll go and add a leg again. Now when I do that, it will copy everything that we've done in the first leg and go and paste it into the second leg. Here it's gone and added this baby blue color, so I'm going to go and alter that right out of the gate, ensuring that we have a color that we want. So I'm going to go make this one green, and now we've got blue for the left and green for the right. Now this leg should have actually copied everything over. I always do like to check to make sure, and it does seem to be moving in exactly the same way. If we go choose the upper bone here in the rig, the parentmost bone in the leg, we go look at its X position here. We got 8.634, and if I choose the one on the other side, it too should be 8.634, only without the negative. And so that does look completely symmetrical from one to the other. Excellent. Next, I'm going to grab her pelvis, and with this, I'm going to go and add a spine, which is going to create a series of bones and a new hub up at the top, which is pretty cool. I'm going to go to my side view, and I'm going to bring this hub down. I'm going to use this hub for the topmost part of her pelvis, or her torso, sorry. So something about here. And I would like to try and get a little bit more rotation into this to make it appear to be a little bit more like her her actual spine. And so what I'll do is I'm going to take the bone that's at the bottom here, and I'm going to rotate it. Now I'll take the bone that's at the top here, and I'll rotate it a little bit as well. That's not too bad. Whoops. Something like that. Now I do need to move this other bone, kind of get it out of the way. And the reason for this is that it's right now it shares a pivot point, or close enough, with the pelvis. So there's the spine bone. There's the pelvis. And as you can see, that's exactly in the same position. Actually, I think that's going to be okay. So what I'll do is the pelvis, the larger bone here, will rotate from that point to move everything below that. The spine bone will rotate from the same point, moving everything above that point. So we go look at the positions of each of the following pivots on each of these bones. You'll see that they do kind of walk their way up her spine, with the last one being just about where the arm is here. And so I might go and pull this up a little bit further to get it a little bit more in line with the distance between her clavicle and her collar, or the scapula. So that kind of center point there. Something like that. I'm going to bring the length of this bone down a little bit to try and make it match the rest. Now, this bone is a hub. It is a different type of bone. But it is going to make a little bit more sense if I just make this thing match a little bit. So I've got 10, 16, and I'll copy this number. And I'm just going to plug those same values in here so that this bone is much like the others. Now, in doing that, you can see that this is not giving us the same dimensions here. The axes are different. And so I'll go and swap the length and the width. And that now does appear to be just another spine bone. Now, this is giving us a fade in color. I'm going to use a different process here. I'm going to use the same teal color that I've got for all of the bones in the spine. I just find it a little bit easier if everything down the center line to me has that teal color, almost like it's a blend between these two values. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Again, check my positions out here. Now you notice the pivot for the hub is also in the center of the hub, whereas the spine bones, the pivot is at the bottom of the bone. That's okay too, just something to keep an eye on. Again, we are interested in the pivot points and not the boxes themselves. This is also kind of something you can see here when you look at each of these spine bones compared to the next. You know, the boxes actually fit within each other, and this one's half buried in that one. So again, it's the pivot point that is of interest to us here. Now with this hub selected, we can go and add an arm. And if we do that, you'll notice that it creates a green arm here. I'm going to go and select all those bones before I do anything and put them on our blue color, like so. Now you might want to make this blue color lighter or darker so that you can differentiate between the bones when you look at them from the side view, between upper and lower limb. Again, completely up to you. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is start off with a collarbone. which is the main bone that I have here. Now, there are a couple of things that I've seen people do at rigs that are really cool. Again, I'm not a rigger myself. I'm okay at this, but it's not something that I can do for production. I can get by with doing this to make sure that my characters move. But there's been a lot of advancements in rigging since I ever did it for production. And I just never kept up with it. I kept up with the modeling and texturing side of things, and never bothered keeping up with anything else. One of the cool things that I've seen is doing a scapula and a collarbone together, creating this kind of triangular joint in the shoulder, much like we actually have. For our character here, we're going to rely on the spine to move the back and everything else there, and the collarbone just to move the things that we have in the front. Now, this is one thing that kind of irks me with riggers, is that a lot of them don't seem to take a lot of interest in the positioning of your collarbone. With your arms down, your collarbone is pretty much flat. And when your arms are up in a T-pose, like a lot of people use for modeling, your collarbone is not flat anymore. Your collarbone is actually up at an angle. And this is kind of a funny thing, because it's important to get that right. And I realize that they do this for the purposes of IK. But when your arms are completely parallel with the ground, this bone needs to not be parallel. It actually needs to be rotated up at an angle like this, which is moving your shoulders up. That kind of orientation happens naturally in the human body. Okay, I'm going to select the entirety of the arm, and I'm going to go and place the shoulder in the correct position. So I'm just going to use the move tools to do this. And I'm going to do this in both the X, Y, and Z. Now you'll notice when you have multiple joints selected, we can't see where the pivot point anymore, where it's located anymore. And the reason for that is this little drop-down menu here. It gives you a central or a uniform selection point based off what you have selected. And so I want to make sure that I'm actually using the very top node here. And that's going to use the pivot point as center. And so that allows me to actually get this much better into the right position of her shoulder. Somewhere about there. Now it gets a little hard to see here when you have so much going on. And this is also part of the reason why I like having my mesh broken up into these different chunks here. So if I go to my mesh layer, and we hide her cape, I now have the ability to see with a little bit more clarity where that shoulder is without seeing too much in the way. Next, I'll go to my rotate, again, repositioning my gizmo here. And I'm going to bring the arm out. Now, to do the rotation, I only need to grab the one bone to rotate it out. Now, I do want to make sure I'm doing this the right way. So somewhere thereabout. And I'm going to rotate this to make it match her forearm. And we're going to bring it forward so that the elbow is in the right joint. That's not too bad. I'm going to go and pull the length of this bone down. Again, the joint here of the next bone is what's really important. So again, I'm going to go to my top view and try and get this right. Now, this is why I like having the local turned on when doing this, is that I'm not going to destroy how straight these joints are by moving them locally like this. And so it gives me the ability of placing this correctly without too much worry. So that looks not too bad there. And see where her elbow is, and it's kind of placed in about the right area. Excellent. I'll go back to my rotation, and we'll spin this arm bone back down. This is the forearm here. And I'm going to get it into about the right position here as well. And we're going to pull its length down. Again, using the pivot of the next joint here to figure out when that's in the right place. So the next joint's pivot, which is about here, and again, you can see it easier with the move tool, needs to go in the center of the wrist. And so that looks pretty spot on there. I'll go back to the forearm. I'm liking what I'm seeing. And double check. Yeah, that's not too bad. I might want to bring it back just a little bit. Yeah, I like that better. Just like we did with the leg here and adding multiple different segments, I'm going to do this with the forearm as well. So if I show you the problem we have here, if I rotate the hand to supinate or pronate that bone, you can see that there's nothing happening with the forearm, which is not what happens in the human body. When you supinate or pronate your hand, meaning to turn it palm up or palm down, what you're going to have happen is the rotation from that actually occurs in your forearm. It's the radius and the ulna rotating around one another. And this rig currently doesn't have the ability to do that. There's only one bone in the forearm. And so we'll need to go and correct that. Here, I'm going to go and find these segments, and I'll give this 3 segments as well. And now you can see when I rotate this thing, we can actually get a proper rotation in that hand, which is beautiful. So now I'll just try and rotate the palm bone here so that it lines up with her hand. And I'll bring its length down as well so that I can expose the knuckles. And I believe she's got a little bit of an uptake in her wrist that's in there. And this is going to be necessary as well. I'm going to bring the width down a little bit, and I'll bring the height down a little bit as well. Just trying to match a little bit more closely the shape of her bones. Now, we lost our blue color here by modifying the bone, so I'm going to go replace it. And then we can go and make sure that the names of what we're running here work for us. So the name of this limb is the L arm, or left arm, which is good. The name of this bone is collarbone. The name of this bone, and I may go add 3 segments in here as well. Again, add our blue color. So the name of this bone is left arm, and the bone name here is bicep. And then this is the segment name 1, bicep 2, bicep 3. Again, checking the name up here. Next, we'll have the forearm. And so I want to go and name that as well. So here the name is going to be forearm. And then again, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. Lastly is the palm. I like to rename the palm to hand. I just find it a little bit easier to keep that in line. Now, some people, when they name their bones, and you know, this is just a personal preference thing, the names of bones don't really mean much so long as you're consistent. But what I find some people do, you'll notice here that my bones are named for where they are in the body. So the thigh bones are all in the thigh, the femur. The calf bones are all in the calf, and so on. But some people name the bones after the joints. So, for instance, instead of the thigh, these bones would be named after the hip. And the calf bones would be named after the knee. And the only reason I don't do that is that, for me, the knee is between the calf and the thigh. And to me, knee could mean one or the other, not necessarily be that distinctive. Again, I'm not a rigger, I'm not an animator, and you know, they probably have just as good a reason to do what they're doing when they do them that way. But to me, it just makes a little bit more sense this way. So that's not too bad there. We've got the arm done. We got to go and do the hand here now. Now this is going to be important to get this right. I'm going to go and put a little bit more twist into this. I want to make sure that this lines up as accurately to the shape of her hand here as I can. And I'm going to try, and again, I'm going to make sure I expose the knuckles. And I'm going to thin it out a little bit more. And probably thin it out a little bit here too. And see where I can get that joint in for the thumb. Okay, I now have the hand bone selected, and I'm going to add a bone. Our new bone is going to become the tarsal of the thumb, or sorry, not the tarsal, the carpal for the thumb. And so I'm going to go and place it in about the right position. using rotation, I'm going to go and line it up a little bit more with the thumb. Now, if you look at the bones that we have here, they should all have about the same orientation, which is not actually the case. They're all pointing X towards the next bone, and everything in the arm here has got a negative Z up. And if I do these ones, you know, that negative Z is now going sideways. There's a little bit of a different orientation to all of these things, which is something that needs to be rectified at one point. What I do want to make sure is that the rotation that I'm doing here is going to be along the same axis. So if you look at it this way, the elbow rotates along Z. So if I go and look at my thumb, right now it does not rotate around Z. And that's what I want to have happen. So I'm going to rotate this, and so that it does rotate along Z. So I'm kind of positioning my camera here so that I'm looking along the length of my thumb and placing that bone again in about the right position inside the meat of her hand here. And I'm going to go reduce the size of this thing down to 1 unit by 1 unit. And I'm going to just give this a slight bend. And the idea is that to ensure that this runs the right kind of straight way that it should, I'm going to line the bone up with her thumb. So essentially, if I can get the tip of the bone, move this back out a little bit, and back this way a little bit. If I can get the bone to actually line up with the tip of her thumb, I can ensure that it's in the right position. Something like that. Now, in order to get this right, I bring the rotation back, or the length back, and then I'm going to rotate the bone up so that it's in the right position, hitting about where the end of that joint would be. So this is going to run from the hand till about the end of the bone, which is going to be in about where the thumb pivots from here. So I'm still up a little too high. I'm going to bring this back down and give it a little bit more length. So to about there. It's kind of paying attention to where the knuckles are here. All right, so you got one knuckle of your thumb kind of back there, and that looks about right to me. I'm going to add another bone. This one does go along the length, which is nice. I'm going to only rotate it along the Z-axis here, because again, we line this up to point out the thumb. So this one should naturally already be lined up with the thumb. And I'll bring its height down again until it ends at the next knuckle, and add another bone. And I'll just give this one a slight arc as well, and reduce its length until I just see the tip of the thumb pointing out. And there we have carpals for her thumb. Now, I'm going to take the bone here that I've got for the hand, and I'm going to reduce it down so that it actually is just a wrist. Now, the reason for this is for this character, I actually want to have carpals for each finger, so that I can curve the hand and be able to alter the shape of the hand a little bit, because I think it's going to end up looking quite a bit nicer. Now, if you pay attention, 2 phalanges, 1 carpal in the thumb. That's 1 joint less than we get in the fingers. Important to note. Okay, selecting the hand again, I'm going to add another bone. I'll select that bone, and before I do anything, we'll go one by one. And we'll go place this in about the right place that the carpals should be in the hand. Now, if you're unsure of the positioning of where these things go, you can always look up reference to see where they go. Again, the pivot is kind of the important part of this here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of base them just a little bit at the end of where this bone is. And I want them to be close to each other without actually overlapping. So maybe something like that Okay, then I'm going to rotate this. Now, this is the only bone that I really need to worry about not lining up with the finger. And so what I want to do is I actually just want to line this up to the knuckle. Something like that. And again, it's the end of this bone that I'm interested in, so that is going to be where the knuckle ends. So I'm going to bring this back in. Again, I want the knuckle here at the end of the carpal to be inside the hand and not inside the finger. Okay, so something like that. And I'm going to go and just adjust its rotation a little bit more. Again, just to make sure that it lines up with that finger. I got a length here of 6.279, so it's going to be important to remember. I'm going to go add another bone. And we'll take this bone. Remember to switch bones once you create them. You do have the hand bone selected at first, and that can be problematic if you're not paying attention. So again, I'm going to bring this bone out of the hand and put it up against the index carpal. I'm going to rotate this up, over, and into the knuckle here, where I'll reduce its length down. And again, just try and ensure that it is kind of looking along the same angle here as the finger. And that looks okay there. I'll grab the hand bone and add another bone. Again, I'll switch to that bone. We're going to go 1 and 1 for the X and Y. And again, move it out to the hand bone. Move it over. Rotate it to point at the middle finger. And go and rotate this up. There should be, between the 4 carpals at their end positions, a slight rounding. I'm going to go pull the length of this one down. Try and get that to be about, whoops, here. About, again, the right place so that we end up with a nice and straight finger come the end of it. And, I want to make sure that the middle finger here is longer than the ring finger. Just by a little bit. That's not too bad. It might be a little long. Okay. That's good. I'll go and select the hand again and add another bone. Again, remember to select that bone. 1 and 1. And this will be the carpal for the pinky. So again, I'm going to go and move it out and then shift it over beside the other carpal, where I can rotate it to point at the pinky. Reduce its height along. And this one should be a little bit shorter. Now, if you've inaccurately modeled your hand and the anatomy that you did was incorrect, you're going to run into a problem where making the bones anatomically correct isn't going to make a lot of sense. And so, pay attention to where on your mesh joints are supposed to be. If you've overly stylized something, you got to keep that stylization going into the bones as well. You don't just, go cartoony with one with exaggerated proportions, and then when you place the bones of the rig in place, you go hyper realistic with their dimensions and things. It's not going to make a lot of sense. Okay, back over to the index. And in fact, we can go and name these along the way. I'm going to leave them as they are. We'll name them all after here. So I'm going to add a new bone. This is going to be the first phalanx of the first finger, or the index. And so I'm going to rotate this down. I'm going to pull its length down until, again, I end up with geometry in the right place. Now, this one doesn't matter if it lines up exactly with the carpal. This one does, however, matter if it lines up with the finger. And so I'm going to, again, adjust this thing. We'll bring the length down here so that the finger just pokes out the end. And what this is going to allow me to do is if I just kind of look along the length of this thing, I can line this up so that it actually aligns quite nicely with the finger. So now I'll rotate it up so that I've got it running along the right length. I'll pull the height down so that it ends at the knuckle. Add another bone. Select the next bone. Bring it down. Reduce its length. And add another bone. Select that bone. Bring it down a little bit and reduce its length. Or in this case, I'm going to increase the length. So this is part of my mesh not being anatomically correct here, in which the phalanx of the fingers, or the phalanges, these should actually be getting shorter as we go along. And in the case of mine, I've actually got a little longer fingertips on her than probably was meant to be. Next, middle. Again, I'm going to go and rotate this bone so that it goes right through the end of that finger. Just so that, again, I can line it up to be absolutely straight. Like so. That's not too bad. That one, actually, the carpal lined up quite nicely. We'll go and pull the length of this one down, again, so that it's in that knuckle. So about there. Add a bone. Select the new one. Pull it down inside the finger. Reduce its length. Add a bone. Select it. Rotate it into the right shape. And reduce its length to just barely cover the fingertip. Grab the next carpal. Add another bone. Select that bone. Again, we're going to line this up with her ring finger, trying to ensure that it is as straight along here as can be. Let's increase the length here again so that it cuts off the tip a little bit. Oops, I don't want to arbitrarily move this. So that's not bad there. So there we have it. I'll bring this up and again reduce its length. That first knuckle, add another bone. Now the really nice thing about this is every time you add another bone, they do end up exactly in the right position. I'll pull this guy down and reduce him down as well. Cool. Last one, add another bone, and again the same principle applies. Bring this guy down, extend it so that it covers the tip of the finger or just barely. Whoops. Rotate it to make it line up with that finger. And again, I want to get the fingertip to be right in the center of this thing. This will make sure that I'm really nicely aligned. And when that's done, I can go and rotate this so that it will end up in the knuckle. Reduce its length. Add a bone. Select the bone and angle it down into the finger. Reduce its length. Add a bone. Select the bone. And bring that into the right position. And there we have the hand good to go. The only catch, nothing is named correctly. And so we'll go and do that. So this is going to be, now there's kind of a funny thing that happens here. In that the names don't get inherited along the way. So the first bone takes the name of the parent, which in this case was hand bone, and it gets a number 001. The next one is hand bone 001, bone 001. The next one is hand bone 001, bone 001, bone 001. So they just keep inheriting the parents' names and working their way down. So none of that is good. So what I'll do, I'm going to select the 3 bones from the thumb, and I'm going to pop open the rename tool, and we're going to go and rename everything here. So first, the name of this is going to be Batgirl Rig L for left, as this is her left hand. We're going to do thumb. Actually, let's do hand, so that all the hand bones end up together alphabetically. We'll do thumb, as this is the thumb. And then what we can do is we can number these things. So we're going to add a suffix. Actually, we'll add a numbered, and we'll rename that. And then we'll go double check that that has worked. So Batgirl Rig Hand Thumb 00, which I'm going to rename. This is going to be Carpal, followed by Thumb 1 and Thumb 2. Okay, that worked quite nicely. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy that name, and I'll place it in here. So this is the left hand, and this is going to be index carpal. I'll copy everything, including the word index. And now I'll use the auto namer. So I'll go and add that. We're going to number these, and I'll start with the number 1. So that should give me 1, 2, and 3. I'll rename this bone using paste. We'll remove index. And this is going to be middle, carpal. We'll copy the middle out. Paste it in here. And rename those. I'll do the same thing here. We'll remove middle and we'll write ring. Rename those. And we'll put pinky in here. And rename those. So now I've just got the ring, carpal, and pinky carpal. Okay. Naming is done. Left arm hand, left arm forearm all the way down, left arm collarbone. So I do like the naming that I've got. I'm going to go ensure that these are all blue, since the bones got kind of mismatched a little bit. And we'll go select our hub, the top bone of the spine, and we'll add another arm. This will then inherit all of the changes we made to this first arm. You'll see that it works away for a little bit here. You'll see these bones getting generated and placed. Once it's done, we'll have a second arm, which I'll go make green. Blue arm, green arm. All right. Off we go, moving on to the next stage. I'm going to grab the hub, and I'm going to add a new spine to the hub. Now, this spine is just going to be for the neck and the head. So first, what I would like to do is reduce the number of arms in this spine. And so to do that, I select any one of the bones in the spine here. And I'm going to reduce the number down. The default is 5. I'm going to bring it down to 2 bones. And now we've got 2 bones. And I'm going to go and reposition these 2 bones. Again, position them a little bit more accurately for where the neck would be. And I'll go into my rotation, and I'm going to line them up with the neck here as well. And we'll go bring their size down quite a bit here too. So we'll bring the length of this thing down. And you can see that's doing both neck bones at the same time, which is quite nice. And then if I go and place this actually ended up exactly where I wanted it. I want the base of the skull here to be maybe a little further back, up a little bit more. I want to kind of be just behind the base of the ear a little bit, which will give us a really nice curvature of her neck, inclining a little bit forward. And again, you can see that this bone is not what we're going to want, but that's okay. So I'm going to grab these joints, and we'll go and color them our teal color here, to indicate that they are part of the spine. You could always go and make these things, at least in the neck bones here, a slightly different color so you can differentiate them from the torso. You can also go and add some yellow to things like the head, so you can differentiate it from the neck. And you can go and put a gradient in the color of these things as well too, which is really nice to be able to do. So there is the bulk of the body essentially done. Now, as I mentioned, the shape of these bones are not anywhere near where we would like them to be. And so I do want to go in and clean this up a little bit and make this a little bit easier to use. So the head here, as an example, this is a absolutely terrible shape of a human head. You know, this is not going to, allow us to see any bones in the face, which we're going to need to place as well. You know, the neck bones are larger, thicker, and wider than the neck is as well. And so we'll take a look at how to customize these bones to actually make them into something a little bit more useful. And we'll take a look at a couple of different ways that you can do this. So let's start with the head bone, since it is pretty disastrous. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the modifier panel here and place a modifier on this called Editable Poly. And now I have all the tools of Edit Poly on top of our bone object. And what I can do is I can use those to now go and manipulate this object. And this allows us to also put a symmetry on top of this, so that we can line this up the right way here. And that way we only really need to make changes to one side of this thing, and the other side will come along for free. And so the idea is to go and manipulate this here and start to make something a little bit more head-like. So let's take this imagery off. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just going to undo a little bit here. I'll model this in a little bit of a smarter way. So I'm going to add a center line here, and then I'll go and delete this side. And then we'll put our symmetry modifier on in Z. There we go. There, that'll make modeling a little bit easier. And so the idea now is essentially just box modeling and, you know, doing something pretty rudimentary. I'm not going to be spending hours and hours and hours modeling this, but it does give me all of my modeling tools at my disposal. So all of the things that, you know, I'm already pretty accustomed to using while modeling, I can now go and use those to tweak the mesh. And so I'll go and pull this back a little bit. I'll pull these guys back a little bit, just a little bit less. And we'll pull these ones without that, at least in the top view, kind of down and in even further. These ones can come in. And you can see I'm just kind of really just roughing in the shape of the character here. So those next two bones can come in a little bit. Now, the shape of the bones does have a level of importance when it comes to your work, and that level of importance is based off of what's going to happen when we apply skinning to your mesh. Now, the skinning by default will apply to all the bones and all the vertices that you use. And what's going to happen when you do that is there we go. What's going to happen is that when you skin your mesh, every vertex that's on your mesh is going to get influenced by the rig. And there is a default that happens, how Max interprets how much influence to put on each of the bones. And that influence is that the default that you're going to get is influenced by the shape of the bone. And a lot of bones have the ability to change dimensions and what have you to better influence the shape that you're going to get by default. And so what I like to do is to get this, you know, just close enough that it looks like my character without really getting, you know, I don't want to spend hours and hours modeling bones. And I'll show you a couple of different ways that we can actually do this here. But the idea is that I want this to look like my character without having spending hours doing so. And I don't want to have to, spend forever tweaking this to the point that I'm, really crazy in modeling this. If your mesh is low enough poly, we can actually even use your own mesh as the the shape of the bone. And so I'm going to kind of set this up a little bit here. We'll get it kind of close enough to the shape of the mesh, and then I'll show you a couple of different techniques that we can do. So in this first one, I'm just kind of box modeling from scratch. I'm going to go and hide these two bones only because they're in the way. We'll go back to the edit poly here. And the idea, and again, I'm spending a little bit more time on the face than I am anything else, but the idea is to kind of get these things close enough that they work, and that I can see the shape of my character in here. So this is going to be the jawline kind of coming up. So I'll bring these guys up a little bit, bring all of this up as well. And you can see I only really just did the front of her here. We got to do the entirety of the back as well. And so we can go and do that. Again, I'm working on a symmetrical level here, so I only really need to do the right side of her head. And so I can pull these in, and these can come in. Put them about there. Now what this does when you edit geometry like this, so the bone object, is that we are not editing that object's pivot point. We are only editing the visual look of the bone. Again, the nice thing with that is that the pivot is already in the right place. And so once you kind of edit this so that it looks a little bit more like the shape of your geo, it'll make that skinning a little bit easier. And we can use this to, again, better set up our skinning. And so I wouldn't advise, when you do the entirety of your character, I wouldn't advise spending any more than, an hour doing the entirety of the shape. I won't even do that here. I'll just kind of do a little bit of the main head bone here, where I can show you kind of what I'm talking about in terms of setting this stuff up. And then we'll take a look at some other ways that we can edit these bones. And so, again, I'm just going to kind of line these up a little bit here with the back of her head. Something a little bit more like so. Get that curvature back. So that's not too bad there. Again, I got some width issues I got to take care of here. So I just go move this in, and move this one in, and move this one in. And eventually, we'll get to a position here where these will just kind of already be in the right position. I might go and slide this guy back and out a little bit further. Again, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It's, it's the aesthetic here is just for you, as long as it's kind of close enough to the entirety of the shape. And so, I'll bring this one out to represent her cheekbone a little bit further. It's almost like you're doing a proxy or a lower LOD version of your mesh. Something a little bit more like that, I think, will work. Again, you can be as picky as you want while doing this. Bring these guys down and do a little bit more of a brow on it here. Okay. I might go put one swift loop in here, only because I don't like that forehead. And so we'll just go and give it a little bit more curvature. Good enough. So there you have it. A very low res edit of this thing. Again, just to make it look a little bit more like the character. Now, with this being one of the back characters as well, I can always go and do an extrusion here. Pull this guy up like so, and collapse it into a single point. Grab that point, and from the front, go and actually have this sit inside the cowl in the right place. Just to represent the shape of the mesh underneath. This is useful if you're actually going to have more than one rig on screen at a time. So if you're, be animating a cutscene or something like that, this is a really useful way of being able to tell the difference between them. Other than that, it has no real value other than, influencing the vertices underneath. Now, once you have gone and done edits like this, You'll notice that, we don't want to leave these modifiers in our stack. And so the trick here is that you just need to convert this to an editable poly. And the system won't allow you to do that. It'll actually, instead of converting it to an editable poly, we'll convert it back into an object, and we'll turn on the Use Custom Mesh. So all of those changes that we've done are now in that Custom Mesh button. So if I go and turn that off, our box comes back. And so it gives us the ability to turn this feature off and on at a whim. So I'm just going to unhide the other bones that we did. So there's something a little bit more like that. So in this technique of modifying the geometry, we went and we did adding an edit poly modifier, and then just, box modeling directly on top of this into the shape that we want. I'll show you another technique for customizing these bones. This one is going to use a new piece of geo. So here's a cylinder, and I'm going to do this in wireframe just so I can see a little bit easier, although that's not going to be a heck of a lot of good to me. So I'm just going to make a cylinder about there. I'm going to reduce it down. I don't need it to be that high poly, so I'm going to go down to 10 sides. We don't need any height segments. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to align this using Alt-A to the bone in the neck here. This is going to be the top neck bone. And I'm going to align the orientation as well. Here I just need the Y orientation so that it lines up like this. And then you can see that actually does end about where the head does, which is nice. I'm going to hold Shift to make a copy of this, and I'll align the copy to the other neck bone, like so. And now this is kind of a second way of editing these bones. So what I'll do is I'll take the upper neck bone, I'll add an Edit Poly modifier again, and here I'm going to go and attach that cylinder that I made that's inside the neck bone. Next, I'll go to Elements, and I'll select the box and delete it. And essentially what we've done is we've just swapped those bones out. And now when I convert this back down, our bone is now a cylinder, which matches the shape of the neck a little bit better. I can do the same thing with this one. Grab this, add an Edit Poly. I'll go and attach, and I'll select the cylinder. I'll go to Elements, I'll select the box and delete it. And now those bones have actually been replaced with cylinders about the right size. They're not quite the right size. They're actually a little bit thinner than her body, and what's more important is they're actually inside her body. That's okay. I'm not too concerned about that. So that's a second way that you can go and modify these things to get them to be a little bit closer to the shape you're looking for. There is yet another way that we can do this. Here, what I'll do is I'll do this on one of her thigh bones here. So we'll start with the central thigh bone. The only reason I'm going to start with this one is it's the easiest one to do, so it'll make for a shorter example. So the first thing I need to do in this instance is go into my system here, and we're going to go and find in the mesh category Batgirl herself. I'm going to select the Batgirl mesh, and I'll clone it to a copy, not an instance. And I'll call this bone mesh, like so. And then I'll keep bone mesh here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze everything. Actually, I don't want to do that. Let's take bone mesh out. I'm going to put bone mesh in the default. And we'll actually hide the rest of her. So all I can see here is bone mesh, which is good. So what I'm going to do now, I'll go to the front view, and I'm on the bone mesh here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get some lines on this mesh. So say this line here, turn on my edge constraints, go into vertices, and I'll try and just line that up with where the bone ends, which is somewhere a little bit like this. And then at the bottom, we do happen to have another one. I'll make sure. I'm just going to do one leg here. I'll show you why. So again, I'm just going to rotate this one a little bit to try and get it to match the angle of the bottom of that bone and pull this up like so. Next, I'll just go and select all of the polygons in that section, detach them, and this is going to be a new object, so I don't care what it's called. And then we'll go and isolate the bone and the new mesh that I made, like so. So what I'm going to do with this new mesh here first is just cap it so it doesn't have holes in it. And we'll also go and quad off the top here so that we get something a little bit cleaner to work with. I'm getting to the point where I can't see here, so I'm going to just jump ahead. We're going to put an edit poly on this, attach the leg mesh, go to select element, and delete the box. Now I can continue to quad this off here without the mesh being in the way. But it also shows you that end result, which, in this case, is I now have a usable mesh that is essentially the exact same shape and size of the bone, or of the mesh. So we get out of the unhide all. So there's now the bone for that central part of her thigh. This too, gives you a much more accurate look at that. And so, if I were to go and do that for the next joint, so you can see two of these things in a row. Again, I still have the bone mesh here selected. I'll go into the front view. That line is already set up correctly. We'll go to the side view and see if we can't find something here. And we'll do it to about there. So I'm just going to grab these vertices, and maybe I'll line them up in Z and bring them up a little bit and rotate them just a little bit. There. So again, I'll detach this mesh. Let's make sure I converted this other mesh down. There we go. So again, I'll grab the bone, put an edit poly on, attach the mesh that I just made, element, select the box and delete it, convert the whole thing to an editable poly. Again, isolate it, and I probably want to go and cap this. Now, you'll notice I actually did both thighs by accident here from selecting from the side. No big deal, we'll delete the other one. Again, I'll go and cap these. And maybe what I'll do here is just to speed this up. I'll use the turn to poly to close up my mesh. Again, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. But there is now two consecutive bones in here. Are going to drive the leg, and having them the shape of the leg like this is really, really nice. So again, if I can twist this, you can kind of see that fall off that we're going to get rotating in those joints. Again, these names come directly from the bone that was there, so I don't have to worry about renaming or anything once I'm there. So the idea is going to be to go into all of your bones and set this up as closely to the shape of your mesh as you can. You can do this for the arms. I would probably leave the hands like this, and probably be a little too finicky to go and do that. I can delete this mesh now. I'm not actually going to use that. And now you can actually see there's the bone and the mesh actually occupying the same space, which is really nice. So that's the third method that you've got for going in and uniquely setting up what these bones are going to look like. Now, there are a few bones that we've neglected to talk about in the creation of this rig, and things that are going to be of most importance to us here. The first are auxiliary bones. So the auxiliary bones are the bones that we're going to use to move additional components of our character. So case in point, the bones that I have right now really just move Batgirl if she was naked. And even then, it won't even move all of her. She's got a ponytail, or in this case, a big bun sticking out the back of her cowl, and I need to have that thing bob around and move. She's got a cape, and the cape too is going to require rigging. Even if you plan on doing it with physics and an engine, you still need some bones in there to be able to move it. There's nothing less Batman-like than having a cape flip up and go over your head, which if you just did it completely with physics would happen. And so we do want to have some rigging, at least in the shoulder part of this thing, to manage how it's going to move. So we need to add some bones for those sections, which is what I'm going to do now. She's also got a bunch of these little tiny gadgets on her utility belt, which they too that thing's going to need to bob around and move and what have you. In fact, I left her utility belt as being, and I'll kind of show you this a little bit better here. I just, let's hide the rig. And I'm just going to get her out of X-ray mode for a moment so you can see this a little bit clearer. So the entire idea with her utility belt is that it is not, a belt meant to hold her pants up. It actually is loose fitting on her thigh, on her hip. So as she moves around, this thing would actually bob up and down a little bit. So I would probably need to rig the entirety of the belt, which would be kind of important. And so, there's a lot of that I got to build into this. Okay, I'm back into my rig layer here. I should unfreeze the rig layer and make sure that I've frozen the mesh layer, like so. So let's start with the cape. The cape's actually a fairly easy one. We're going to select the hub here at the top of the shoulders, and I'm just going to add a tail. The tail will grow up and out, which is not an issue. And so what I'll do is I'm going to select the first bone of the tail, and I'll go and rotate it into position. And move it into position. So again, it's the pivot here that I'm interested in. And so I'm going to go move that pivot up to about where the cape comes out of the collar. And then we'll go rotate this bone so that the next bone is also in the cape. Or at least the pivot here is inside the cape. The next one, and you can see this one's going to have to now start come down. The next one's fine. The next one's got to come down as well. And that's actually as far as I need to take this. I won't put any extra bones in it like that. But what these are going to do is essentially they're going to be the rigging of the cape. So if I didn't have physics, I could just move these things around and it would move the cape. I'm going to need more than just one row. And so what I can do is I can actually go and select that hub again. And we'll go and add another tail. We'll select that tail. And I'll go and move this one over to one shoulder. Again, I'll rotate it into position. I probably want to go and put this bone up a little bit again into where that cape comes out of her collar. And I'll again rotate it up and out. And probably have all of these bones also kind of, what I'll do is this, and then I can curve them a little bit more naturally this way. Just something a little bit more like that. So that'll allow me to actually just go and rig and move the upper part of the cape and have it move the way that I want, if I want to have it move one way or the other. I don't want to put too many bones in beyond this because I would be using physics for this and that kind of thing. So here, we'll grab this first bone, and now we'll use the copy and paste here to show you how that works. So I'll go and add the copy bone settings, and then we'll go and add another tail. So I'll select the main, and we'll go and add a tail from the hub. And then I'll select that, and we'll paste mirror, and that'll put that bone into the other side. Now, it didn't seem to have copied everything, so we're going to try that again. I'll select the entire root of this thing, and we'll copy, paste this guy in. Yeah, weird. It does not seem to paste all the rotations in, so we'll just have to manually go and place these in as well. So let's get this inside the cape here a little bit. We'll straighten it out a little bit more. There we go. And again, I'm going to kind of curve this out and bring all those rotations back in. And something like that will give me the ability to then control that cape. Again, these bones all need to be named. They're all called Batgirl Rig Tail 0, Tail 1, Tail 2. And so, actually, they're both called Tail 1. Oh, they all have exactly the same name. So, yeah, they're all going to need different names here. And again, to do that, we're going to use the tools and the rename objects. And from here, we're going to give these a base name of Batgirl Rig. And this is going to be Cape Center, like so. And then I'm going to number them starting with 1. So I'll double select that bone and rename that. I'll double select the ones on the left and we'll rename center left. And then same deal with the right. And we'll rename them right. And now all of the cape bones are named. I'll grab her head and I'm going to add a bone here. So add bone. We go to our wireframe. We can see the bone. We'll go to our side view. So I'm going to make this her bun. So I'm going to again place the pivot point at the position from which I would like to move her bun. And maybe I'll make this 6 by 6 by 6. Like so. And now I have a joint in her head that'll allow me to wiggle and wobble her hair. So I can even do this one with physics as well. So as she runs, that little hair mass at the back of her helmet here will bob around and move. This too is going to need a name. So this will be not this. This will be called hair. So if we go and select it now, it's going to be called Batgirl Rig Hair, which is good. I don't need it to be named after the head, which currently is not called head. So I'll name it head. Our 2 neck bones also aren't called neck in any way. They have not been converted down either. Batgirl Rig neck 1. Neck 2. Okay, so we're on a good start here. We're on a good pace. Again, I would need to add auxiliary bones for all of the pouches and all of the capsules and things on our belt. An actual bone for the belt, so I can move that around as well. I'm not going to do that right now. In order to keep this video fairly manageable, we're going to skip ahead and assume that that's been done already. Now, one of the things that I did not show that I do want to cover here too, the left leg and right leg are no longer the same because I made geometry changes to 1. So here's a really cool thing that you can do. I'm going to go and select the parentmost bone of the left leg and copy it. Select the parentmost bone of the left or the right leg, and here I'm going to go and paste mirrored, and it'll actually just mirror all the settings for the bone, and so gives us the thighs then done kind of the right way. The pelvis too is a bone that I really need to get done correctly. Again, if I convert this to an editable poly or add the edit poly modifier to it here, even just grabbing the vertices and moving them down so that they aren't in the object itself is going to help. But again, you want to kind of form this a little bit closer to the the shape of your character's body. Just to help with the skinning once you get there. And so, I've just done an extrusion here. I'll pull this down. Maybe I'll do one more as well. And the idea is to, use this to try and help shape the bone as best you can. I don't know how much of her butt I need to add into this bone, but already just giving me those splits here are going to help a lot. Again, if I add another central connection here and delete this side and place a symmetry modifier upon this, it'll give me the ability to then just work on one side. And so again, I can go and try and get this to match the shape of her pelvis a little bit more. Here, maybe just grabbing the front one Bringing that in a little bit more. I can bring the back ones on her butt in a little bit as well. You know, it probably wouldn't hurt to add another connection here. Just so that I can, at least from the top, start rounding this. Let's add another central one here. And again, just start bringing this in. To round it out a little bit. Again, this is her butt at the back, so I probably want to make that nice and rounded. And then this is her pelvis here in the front, and so we can trim that in a little bit as well. That should be about where her asis is. Now I'm doing this without the mesh being visible, which is a little foolish. But yeah, I can go and then align this a little bit better here so that it does, you know, fit the shape of the mesh a little bit more. Just making it easier again to kind of visualize what you're doing if you're going to be animating this or moving it around. Again, I didn't really pay too much attention to her butt. It's not the end of the world. I don't really need to move all of the vertices. Just something, again, to kind of approximate the shape a little bit better. And then again, I'll just convert it to an editable poly, and that now has a unique shape. What's really, really nice about this is if you were going to be working with an animator and whatnot, and you get your rig to the point that you know, it is made up of essentially all these pieces that look just like your character. You can give this to the animator, and they can actually use this, you know, without seeing your mesh to get the animations to work. You know, they've got a proxy here that they can animate that will look pretty decent, which is kind of a cool thing. Okay, there is one last element that I need to talk about, and that is the face. Now, we are going to be rigging the face, and it is important to note that I understand that none of the students have done things like an inner mouth, and so we are going to be excluding the inner mouth from the rig. So our characters won't be able to open their mouths, but we still want to have the ability of making them emote and move things around a little bit while they're talking. Now, the process of adding bones to the face is exactly the same as it is everything else, in which you select the rootmost bone. In this case, we're going to select the head, and you would add a bone. This gave us a new little green bone here. And for the eyes, you know, I would go and place this on the pivot point, or the central position here of the eye. And I could probably get this exact by copying that vert position. But doing something like that, going into the side view and going into rotate, I'm going to turn on my angle snaps to get this exactly 90. And moving it out this way to put it exactly on that central line as well. And then we'll bring the position down. What I'll do is I'm actually going to make this 1 and 1, which is quite a bit smaller than the eye. In fact, that's even too big. Let's go 0.1. 0.1, so it's really thin, and I'll just make the length here a little bit longer. So to control the eyes, you now have this little knob that you can select here, and then again the rotation point will move the eye around, which is really nice. So that's the eyes. That's the first one, and it's, you know, fairly simple process. It's all about where you put that pivot point, and it's got to be in the right place. Otherwise, when you go to rotate the eye looking around, the eye will actually pop out of the head. So that's one. In order to do the other ones, we actually want them to be on the surface of the face. And so to do that, what I would do is I would actually hide the head bone. And now that I have one of these bones, we can actually go and duplicate it by holding Shift and dragging out a copy. And we're going to need to make sure that that copy is actually in the right place as well. But now what we can do is we can actually go and place this on the surface of our mesh. So for instance, if I wanted to control her eyebrow, I would go and place this, and the eyebrow, we're going to have 3 of them, one in the central part of the eyebrow, which is going to be about here. And here I'm going to bring this to 1, 1, and 1. That's a little big. Let's go 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. That missed a decimal place. That's not too bad. We'll go 1 step bigger. There we go, 5. So half a unit. And what I want to do with this is I do want to line it up a little bit with the normal of the mesh, meaning having it come out perpendicular from the surface like that. So there's one for the brow. Shift, and I can bring one over here for the central part of the brow. Again, place it in the right position and align it to the normal of the mesh. And then I can go and place one in the outer corner of the brow, again holding Shift and dragging a copy out like so, and then positioning that copy again in the right position and the right orientation so that it lines up. Now these bones, when you animate them, you would actually just be animating them by moving them to move things around. They don't need to rotate, which is why we just need to put them on the surface of the mesh and not actually care too much about where the pivots go. Now, for the complete list of bones that are required for your character's faces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be placing on Blackboard a text document or an Excel sheet that does have a list of all the bones that are required and the names that I actually would like you to have. And I will include all of the bones of the body, though, because every single one of you has different characters that you're making. That means that every single one of the rigs is going to be different, which means I will absolutely need to, not have all bones in my list. You guys are going to have a bunch of them that you're going to add on your own, depending on what other things you're going to need to move. Characters with longer hair are going to need, more chains of bones than what I've done here. I've got one bone back here because it's just a little bobbing bun. But if your character's got long hair, then we're going to need to put a few chains of bones in to move the hair. If you've got anything dangling off your character, we're going to need bones for that. And so on. And so that is essentially, the rigging process that we're doing. And we haven't covered skinning yet, so that should get you completely up to date. Make sure all your bones are named and make sure that you've got them in the right locations. Both are going to be things that I check when I grade. And then, that's about it.